up, my HSM crew? Nathan here, and what an awesome 3-week journey we've been on through one of the smallest but most impactful books of the Bible when it comes to understanding what radical love really looks like. I don't know about you guys, but I've had my fair share of tough relational experiences in my life. So I'm really excited for us to dive into our conversation today about how radical love doesn't just forgive, it restores. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had that awkward moment where two of your friends are fighting, or somehow you end up in the middle of that? I hate that. You're texting one person who says,
I'm never talking to them again.
And then the other person says, tell them I'm over it, but I'm not apologizing. And now accidentally you're the messenger. Like, bro, I never signed up to be a part of this. Or maybe you've been the one who got hurt, actually. Maybe someone spread a rumor about you. Maybe they ghosted you, betrayed your trust, or embarrassed you in front of everybody else. And eventually people tell you, you just need to forgive them, like we talked about last week. But honestly, as we talked about, forgiveness is hard enough. But after we've done all that forgiveness work, someone says,
maybe you should be friends again.
Whoa, let's not get crazy. That's something that at times honestly feels impossible. Because forgiving someone in your heart is one thing, but welcoming them back into your life, that's something completely different. And if we're honest, most of us have become really good at that something else. Blocking, muting, or ignoring. Leaving someone on red, pretending they don't exist. In our culture today, we have become experts at knowing how and when to cut people off. But what we don't really know is how to restore people in our lives. We all know how we react most of the time when someone says the wrong thing, or posts the wrong thing, or makes a mistake. And almost instantly, snap, they're out. They're not invited. They're not included. They're not part of the group anymore. Sometimes people deserve consequences, don't get me wrong. And let's be clear, restoration does not mean pretending nothing ever happened. It doesn't mean every relationship goes immediately back to the way it was. Trust often takes time to rebuild, and sometimes healthy and necessary boundaries are possible. But it's a problem when our first instinct has become exclusion instead of restoration. And honestly, we Christians can do this too, maybe even the worst sometimes. We keep score. We replay what they did in our head over and over again. We judge them. We tell ourselves they used up all their chances. We say, well, at least I'm not as bad as fill in the blank there. We forgive them technically, but we never let them back in. And here's a question we wrestle with here. What does Jesus actually ask us to do when someone has hurt us? As we're wrestling with that question, let's go back into the book of Philemon. By now, we've met all of the characters. Week 1, we met Onesimus, the runaway slave, the one who failed, the one whose identity was completely changed by Jesus. Last week, we looked more at Paul, the one who was willing to absorb the debt, the one who stepped into the middle of conflict. But tonight, the spotlight shifts to Philemon, the person who had every reason to stay angry. Let's read what Paul writes in verse 17. If you consider me your partner, welcome him as you would welcome me. Think about how shocking that sentence is. Paul doesn't say, don't punish him. He doesn't say, forgive him even. He says, welcome him. Treat him the way that you would treat me. Imagine Paul showing up at Philemon's house. Would Philemon slam the door? No. He'd throw him a celebration. He would embrace him and give him the best seat in the house. Paul says, that's how I want you to treat Onesimus. Then Paul continues, if he has wronged you or owes you anything, charge that to my account. As we read last week, Paul absorbs that debt. Then he asks Philemon to absorb the offense. Not because Onesimus earned it, but because that's exactly what Jesus has done for every one of us. Think about your own story. Jesus didn't just forgive your sin. He didn't simply erase your debt and say, okay, you're free, good luck. The gospel goes so much further than that. Romans says we've been adopted into God's family. Ephesians says we've been brought near. 1 Peter says we belong to God's people. Jesus didn't just forgive us. He welcomed us. He restored us. He gave us a seat at his table. Remember and write this down. Radical love doesn't just forgive, it restores. Because that's exactly what Jesus did for us. It's what he calls his followers to do whenever possible. So with that in mind, here's a hard question for us to tackle together. Who have you forgiven but refused to restore in your life? Maybe it's someone in your friend group, a sibling, parent, whatever it may be. Maybe you've decided they don't deserve another chance. And maybe they don't. And if we're being honest with ourselves, neither do we. But thankfully, grace has never been about being deserving. Now, I want to say something really important. Restoration doesn't always mean the relationship looks exactly like it did before. If someone is abusive, unsafe, or manipulative, like we've discussed, and continues to choose and harm people, forgiveness doesn't mean you can and shouldn't still have healthy boundaries. Jesus never asks us to ignore wisdom, but he does ask us to release our revenge, to let go of our desire to make someone pay. That's exactly what Philemon had to do. He had the legal right, the cultural right, the social right to punish Onesimus. Paul asks him to surrender that right. So here's the question for every one of us to really think through. What right to retaliation are you still holding on to? Maybe it's, I hope they feel as embarrassed as I did, or I hope that nobody invites them, or I forgive them, but they'll never be a part of my life again. Maybe today, Jesus is asking you to loosen your grip, not because they deserve it, because that's exactly what he's done for you. And I want to end this entire series a little differently this week. Throughout Philemon, we've seen 3 pictures of the gospel. Onesimus reminds us that Jesus gave us a new identity. Paul reminds us that Jesus paid our debt. And Philemon reminds us that Jesus restores broken people back into relationship. That is the gospel. And that's the kind of community that I know God wants HSM and beyond to be. A place where people don't get labeled forever, where their failures aren't final, and where grace is bigger than gossip. Where people aren't canceled, they're cared for. A place where forgiveness leads wherever it's wise and healthy towards restoration. I now want to invite all of our campus student pastors up to guide us through how we're going to wrap up this moment together.